Thank you everybody for joining. Today we're going to mix it up a little bit. On the Social Enterprise Guys, our mission is to help inspire, connect, and grow social enterprises and social entrepreneurs by providing them with the knowledge and the resources to build their business with a focus on social entrepreneurship. And today we're going to be interviewing Mr. Stephen Brantley. He's already with me on the call today. And we will dive in to try to make this a lot more conversational. And here I am already making it more instructional. So Stephen, how are you?
I'm doing good. I think you're doing well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's Wednesday here in Savannah, Georgia, which is where I'm currently at. And today will be all about really getting to know Stephen as our co-host. You get to hear a bit more about me and my background and Stephen and what inspired him to kind of join this movement. So let's start with we try to have a little bit of structure, but today we're just throwing it all to the wind.
Right.
And, let's go all the way back. Stephen, what messed you up as a child that this is that you want to have, social in front of your entrepreneur title?
All right. Yeah. Well, that's funny. Well, first of all, I have to deal with the anxiety of not having a structure for the call. I'm the one, I like having my points ready and just going through the list of things to cover. So it's gonna be a lot for me. I haven't rehearsed for this. So anyway, yeah, kind of my background. I am from rural South Georgia. I went to the University of Georgia, got a degree in political science, and I was really interested in several different things throughout undergrad, but toward the end there, towards graduating, I was interested in teaching. My mom was a teacher, her sister's a teacher. I really just like the idea of being able to help people understand things. And so I was interested in pursuing basically a master's to let me teach at the high school level for social sciences. But as I learned more about the education system and how complicated it is with the different layers of government, right? You have the federal, state, and local, all with their own unique restrictions and red tape, and it just makes it hard for teachers, traditional public school teachers, to really kind of do what they feel is best in the classroom. And I saw that problem, and then I decided, well, my hands are going to be tied as a teacher, but what I can do is I can work from outside of the system. And I had already played with the different ideas of working from within the system, like, working up into a principal or superintendent. But the reality is, as long as you're within it, in my opinion, your hands are very tied. So from that decision, I decided to pursue a Master of Public Administration. And so that, basically gives me the background, kind of political science is a fairly abstract field, not to mention I, also got a minor in philosophy. So after graduating undergrad, it's very broad. How do I actually use this stuff? And so the way that I could actually take that and make it, I guess, more practical is getting that Master of Public Administration, which actually trains leaders to be ready to hold management positions in government or nonprofit organizations. So I decided on that. I followed my girlfriend down to Macon, Georgia, middle Georgia, after graduating, and worked there for a while. And she was finishing up law school down there, and so I just followed her there just to be with her as she finished up before I started my master's program. And I got very lucky and got a job at a nonprofit as a development director. So I was overseeing fundraising initiatives, marketing, and when you work for a small organization like that, you kind of take on things that weren't originally in the job description. And so that was an incredible learning experience for me. And I really didn't have any interest in the nonprofit sector before that. But I got that experience. And then through some of the fundraising initiatives that we were leading, I got to work with a bunch of community leaders, those in business, those in government, and I kind of developed a passion for building bridges and working across sectors and industries, because we all kind of have similar goals, but we have a tendency to silo and only hang out with, the government folks are just going to be in their own little world and not really know what's going on in the for-profit world or the nonprofit and so on. And so I started developing an interest then of building bridges, and also the fact that I was, I was from a very rural, religious area, and very right-leaning Republican, but my views had all changed over time. So I was able to kind of have an understanding of the different sides, all of these different divisions that we have going on. I understand the Democrats' arguments. I understand the Republicans, the religious, non-religious. So that also kind of put me at a place where I was drawn towards bridge building and bringing people together. Hope this isn't too detailed.
Well, I just want to like cut in and yeah, I don't want to use this phrase all the time, but there's a lot there that I to unpack, and I've got some questions, and so let's take that and kind of like distill it, summarize.
Sure. I haven't even touched on social enterprises yet.
But it's a great story, and I want to go back to your childhood again, which is where I was trying to start. So you mentioned that you've got teachers in the family, right? And you grew up watching them teach, like.
Yeah. I mean, my mom, we were in a really small area. There was only one, middle school, one high school, one elementary school. So I was going to school in the same school that my mom taught in. So I was there and exposed to a lot of what was going on there, and able to meet the faculty and staff.
Right, and then you saw that working within the school system would be more of a challenge to transform it.
Yeah, that didn't happen. That didn't happen until later on, until undergrad, really. Because when I started undergrad, I was all over the place. I was interested in the medical field, psychiatry, neuroscience, and then finally, toward the end, toward graduating, I actually was interested in teaching. I'm like, I was turned away from it because of, honestly, it was the salary. I was like, I would like to make more than what teachers make, and but eventually I accepted that salary, money doesn't mean anything if you're not really being fulfilled in the work you're doing day to day. And so then I decided on teaching, and I worked as a substitute teacher actually in Athens for a little while. But during that time, that was when I was like really learning about the education field and realizing how just how flawed it is, I guess, and how many challenges there are. And so I gave up on the dream to teach, and decided that if I was going to have any effect on education, it would be from the outside. So working as a government official, have influencing that world.
Got it. Yeah, I mean there are some overlaps there. I mean, I started in journalism, right, and studied film. And my idea was going to be to get into more of the production side of media creation. And while the money wasn't the number one reason that I got out of it, I think ultimately like my goal was to help people experience things, I guess. I mean, when you think about watching a good film or reading a good book that like changes you, right? These like experiences enable transformation. And that's always been my goal, right? Like, how do we, with stories, we can help people experience things which help them transform as individuals, which impacts how they interact with other individuals that then transform society. So from my studies, I learned about the transformative impacts of storytelling and media. But still, I think I made a similar decision as you to work outside of the media system. I felt that, today media is honestly controlled by technology. Um, and it's always kind of been like that. The printing press gave way to the radio, gave way to television, gave way to digital, and now social media, right? And um, the ways to really like push back on those medias, or not even just push back, but participate in the future of those media to me has always been technology. And so I got into technology. Anyway, just as you're talking about that, thinking about
Yeah, well, that is kind of interesting because I mean, so the benefit from teaching, right, is I can be in the classroom, or be tutoring a student or something, and be able to see that light bulb moment go off. You see it in their eyes when they get something that they've been struggling with for weeks. And honestly, there's nothing more rewarding than that. But being in the film world, it's very similar in that you're trying to make a difference in the way they think. But it would be harder, I imagine, to get that rewarding feeling. How do you deal with that? It seems like a very rational decision to make a difference, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. How do you get the reward from that? I think
Yeah.
with
Do you go to the premiere and just watch the audience really closely, like, of
I mean,
films?
I think you will ever immediately know the exact impact that media
Mm,
has on an individual, and quite frankly, um, the impact that it has on one person is going to be drastically different to the impact that it has on another person. And in media and cultural studies, like, we looked more at the social, economical, historical implications that gave rise for the need to tell a story in that way, right? So it was kind of like, yeah, they looked at the reception of the audience, like if it was a blockbuster, like why, like what factors led to that. But it was more like, as a filmmaker, as an auteur, like what they would more look down the line. So like, you know, how does the media not impact on the individual level, but on an aggregate,
mm.
on groups, and which groups, right? Different groups are going to respond to media in different ways. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, the there's a great book that I read that's been very integral to what I'm doing now with Wise Assistant, and just like it's really resonated with me, and it's resonated with the what I studied, and it was this idea of the experience economy. I don't know if you're familiar. It's by Joseph Pine. It's relatively I'm not going to say an old book. It was written in the 90s, but they talk about the transformation of the economy from an economy based on commodities, like back when we were selling spices and salt and minerals and all that stuff, to then taking those commodities and making goods, right? And then selling those goods. That that could be anything from like a chair to a table to you know, and then that transformed into the service economy, right? So now, think of like a restaurant, professional services, and each along the way, there's increasing value, right? Commodities, least value, you're paying like a cent for a commodity. Products, you're paying a little bit more. Services, you're paying a little bit more. But it was then services that gave way to what they call the experience economy, right? So individuals or organizations, whether you go to like Dave and Buster's, right? That's it in the experience economy, right? Anything from Airbnb, Uber, like that is the experience economy, right? And you could even put film and media in this. I would have to go back to
Yeah.
the book and like read a little bit more. I don't think I would call it a service, right? I think it exists in that experience realm. But the next realm from that is transformation, right? So they talk about these different levers where commodities give way to products, products give way to services, services give way to experiences, and then experiences drive transformation, which they put at the top of this like pyramid,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Kind of
So
like a Maslow hierarchy of needs.
excuse me?
It's kind of like a Maslow hierarchy of
Yeah,
needs.
it was, and I'd have to like, we'll have to like put a picture, like a, a diagram, because they show how, you know, the increase of value and how they give way to each other. And they were talking about in the 90s how we were existing in this experience economy where, you know, and it's one of the reasons Starbucks was so successful, right?
Mm.
This is one of the things that they talk about a lot in the book. But what Starbucks did was they took a commodity that they could create, coffee, um, for pennies, right? And because they sold it as an experience, a third place is what they called it. It wasn't your home, it wasn't your work. It was this kind of gray area that existed between home and work. That's really what they were selling. They were selling you the Wi-Fi and the, you know, they could get away with selling $6
Yeah.
macchiato because you're really buying the experience. You're buying the relaxation, you're buying the community. And he did it extremely well, right? But as you're talking about education, I think of like this experiences and enabling transformation. So
Yeah.
when did the idea of a social enterprise get introduced to you?
Yeah. Well, so when I was pursuing my master's degree, Master of Public Administration, I was teaching as a graduate teaching assistant. I was leading classes in business analysis in the business college at Georgia State. So I was in the policy school, but I was teaching classes in the business school. And at the same time, I also participated in a program that kind of brought in students from different college, masters and undergrad students from different colleges. And we were exploring careers in DC and just really building connections across colleges, across different industries, interest. And that furthered my interest in kind of cross-sector work, right? Working across, realizing that these artificial barriers that we put up between for-profit, nonprofit, and government, they don't really exist in the real world. They only exist in as much as we give them power. But the reality is, once you start building relationships across that divide, then you realize how similar people are. And so then the trick is just becoming, figuring out how we all work together to reach mutual goals. So that connected me to, hey, I'm interested in working across sectors. And, through that time, I was learning more about the social enterprise movement, which, the social enterprises are kind of this blend between nonprofits and for-profits. And that kind of hit home, obviously, with my my interest in cross-sector collaboration. And so then my consulting focuses on, it started out focusing exclusively on nonprofits, but I also have grown into focusing on social enterprises. And I really do see the social enterprise movement as the future. I don't just see it as a fad or some millennial thing or Gen Z thing. It came almost from a logical place, not a, hey, I was inspired by what these people do. It came from a different place for me. It was, uh, we live in a capitalist system. There are ways to make, we do have a duty to improve the system, to improve the well-being of society. You can do that through government regulation, or you could do it by improving the way that we do business. My background in political science and public administration led me to believe that government regulation is generally a bad idea. And if there's a lot of ways for government regulation to go wrong, and there's a lot of ways for the free market to select for things that are right. They can also do things wrong, of course. But so that kind of led to, okay, well, then the social enterprise movement, smart consumers, driving demand for products that are actually making the world a better place. That really resonated with me, I guess.
Yeah. Gosh, a lot to talk about there. I think that
Yeah, I think we should wake up the listeners that fell asleep during my long
no,
monotone voice.
nobody's here, so nobody's asleep. It's just me and you. The one of the things that I think about is you talk about taking this, I don't think you used the word impact, but the social enterprise movement and the whole purpose angle is meant for impact, right? And there's a lot of, as a business owner and having worked with a lot of business owners in corporate and now in the startup world, I understand how hectic it is. I'm curious how you position your consulting services to the business owners that you come to work with, right?
People do. I mean, what I do, what Brantley Performance Management does, it's strategic planning, but it's strategic planning that is really focused on results. And a lot of consultants will say that their strategic planning methods are focused on results, but you constantly hear horror stories of strategic or organizations hiring a strategic planner, and they get stuck with this. They'll have their board retreat, their strategic planning retreat, and they get stuck with this document of, hey, we have an updated mission and vision and our 5-year goals, but we don't really know how to translate that into any improvements day to day. And so I set out to kind of come up with a methodology that doesn't stop there, that takes it and turns it down and takes these long-term goals, distills them into actionable steps for the next few months, and actually says what we're going to focus on day to day. And in addition to that, how we're going to measure our performance, how we're going to ensure that we are improving. So it's very hard to prove a traditional strategic planner wrong when they just have these broad goals. But I'm giving organizations the actual toolkit to see the improvements, the return on investment as they move forward.
Do you hold your hand along during the execution of the tactics, or like?
I can be involved as much as possible, but usually my interest is kind of in the planning side. So helping them develop. I mean, they're going to be I guess the best way to put it is, I'm a facilitator, and I'm not actually an employee of their organization. They're the experts on their organization. So I'm just giving them the tools and the methodology and helping them get their ideas out there and make smart decisions and prioritize and budget. And so I wouldn't necessarily call it hand holding, but whenever they have a question about the process, they can reach out, and I can provide critiques about how they're measuring performance, how they're measuring their social impact. Are they too focused on outputs, the immediate outputs of their program? And let's say it's a nonprofit, an output would be number of volunteer hours worked or number of participants that we serve. Well, that's not what we're there for. That's not what an organization is there for. The organization is there for the outcomes, for those people to go on and live a better life, to get a job, to increase their overall well-being. So, are we focused on outcomes? Are we comparing that to our costs, our resources, cost effectiveness? So
There's a lot of, I love I love that you've used both those words too, because it kind of brings me back to Joseph Pine and the experience economy, because in the book they talk about this direct, so services are more looking at outputs, and like experiences are meant to deliver a new outcome, right?
Mhm.
And it brings me back to experience I had at Hewlett Packard Enterprise. So that's where I started my career in cloud computing, working for the big guys in enterprises. And one of the products that I was working on before I left was a hybrid cloud solution known as GreenLake. And I won't get into all the details, but I think for the longest time, HPE um, HPE has delivered, output. Like you purchase a certain amount of computing power, and then you can run your business on that computing power. It's very like input money, output energy, computing power essentially.
Mhm.
And how they were trying to shift it was cloud computing as a service, right? It's something that Amazon does extremely well, and why Amazon has been so successful, because their experience is self-service. You can go on AWS, deploy a server, have no clue where it's at, and you're running your business, right? So they, from day one, they were really focused on the outcome, which is I want to operate and grow my business, right? So I just I think about those words when you talk about output and outcome, because it's directly tied to this idea of experience and transformation, Uh,
Right. Mhm.
and like that was the product I left when I left HPE, was this like they were all into, we're revolutionizing the experience of how you consume hybrid cloud. And now I'm going on a tangent, but you've got private and public clouds. A private cloud is something that you own the hardware for. So legacy companies um, companies have a lot of legacy data. You have data on legacy systems such as like banks, governments, and then the public cloud is like what Amazon does really well. And but these are how you engage. The experiences that you engage with both these models are very different, right?
Mm.
You have to lease or purchase hardware. With the public cloud, you just you pay as you go essentially. Um, anyway, that was kind of a
Mm.
tangent.
No, no, it's interesting. I don't know I don't know anything about the tech world, so anytime you're talking, I'm just like trying to soak it up and figure out, put the pieces together.
Yeah, but some other things you're talking about. You're talking about this desire to want to improve the system, which maybe it's just a factor of when and how we're growing up, because I feel the same sort of responsibility, and I believe in the ingenuity of the human race and our ability to overcome very challenging situations through innovation, transformation, um, new ways of doing business and living. And for me, I hadn't heard your whole story. We've known each other for a long time now, and I think this is the first time I've kind of heard a lot more in depth. And I like that focus on improving the system. Obviously, that comes out very clear. And improving that system from the outside, you know, does make a lot of sense. I contrast it to Latin American cinema and how they used in Brazil specifically, how they used filmmaking as a way to shine a light on inequality in Brazil. They used the juxtaposition of shots and of stories and of characters to visually show audiences the difference between like super impoverished groups of people and then super like well-off groups of people.
Mm.
And they even played with the medium that you experience it in. So instead of going to like just a picture show and sitting in the room in the dark, observing in consuming what was inherently entertainment, they forced you to almost have a dialogue during the consumption of media, because their whole theory was like we're going to break the system by working within it, and using the tool to shine light on. So when you talk about like restructuring the system from the outside, I just think of these filmmakers whose goal was like let's break the system from the inside, kind of like you have to exist within the system to and that's not the only way to do it. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it's another approach for a similar outcome. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it's almost like you know, one of Wise Assistant's missions and vision and objectives is to get like you to help people plan and to bring people together, right? Um, and right now, one of the most deteriorating, maybe I won't use the word deteriorating, but social media right now isn't necessarily connecting people in many ways. Like, yeah, like there are times and situations that it does, but in a lot of campaigns, like I think of like the ALS bucket challenge, like some of these campaigns that did do a really good job about social impact cases, but I think on the majority, like doesn't more often than not bring people together. And I think many businesses that are trying to bring people together kind of exist within the system of social media, because nowadays you know it's one of the biggest marketing channels that
Yeah.
exist, right? So these are just some of the things that are going on in my head as you're talking.
Yeah. Uh, it's what's interesting is that what makes, kind of our generation or just certain people more likely or more interested in making the world a better place, or focusing on the world, or improving impact than others. It seems like a lot of people would say, let's just focus. My duty is my family, myself and my family, and that's all I have to worry about, right? And that's, you'll see that it seems like a generational thing, but you're going to find that everywhere. But and so I'm going to focus on getting a job, bringing in as much income to my household, and ensuring that my children go to the best schools as possible. But it seems like we have this drive that's beyond that. Like, my duty is not just to my family; it's to the world. Do you have any answer for why we have this drive? Because I don't necessarily.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a good question. And I think like you have kind of grown, I mean, it's been ingrained in my way of thinking. I think, my parents growing up always were big advocates. Shout out to mom and dad, 'cause they were always big. Golden rule was a big deal. Treat the world as you would, want to be treated. That came up a lot. So I think from a very early age, it was always just a part of my DNA. But then I like challenges. I tend
Mm-hmm.
to get bored a bit more than I am entertained. And to me, it's just this might sound a little simple, but it's just like, why not? Like business alone, there are X many variables that you have to take into account. There's finance, there's operations, there's marketing, there's all these parameters you have to exist within. And I look at your external impact as just another one of those parameters,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that today the private sector and business in general, and I think of tech specifically, it has more resources collectively than most countries, right? So it comes down to, if we have this concentration of wealth, like, why aren't we reinvesting it into innovation? And like, what are we saving it for? And that's why. So to me, I always saw it as like, just another layer of something that's a part of the equation that couldn't and shouldn't be ignored.
Right.
And contrarily, it should be intertwined with the very reason that the business exists, because businesses are out there to solve problems. And what's more important than where we live and how we interact, and how we exchange and how we experience, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. So I share the something I mean, I didn't really mention, but a big thing that's always driven me is the desire to solve puzzles, right? To solve complex problems, and the more complex something is, the more I'm drawn to it. And so that's something I would kind of group in the selfish motivation of. It's just part of my personality. That I'm drawn to nonprofit and government work is that they're complicated, right? In a old school non-social enterprise business, your outcome is it's stakeholder or shareholder value, right? So making profit for the owners. Now, when we start questioning that assumption and realize that that doesn't have to be the only outcome, that it shouldn't be the only outcome, and we should also consider the environmental impact and the impact on society as a whole. Um, I think that makes it even more complicated of a problem than just nonprofits or government agencies alone. And so that's part of what draws me to social enterprises is that this is an interesting, complex movement or field to be kind of studying from an academic level. But
Yeah.
that's something that drives me as well.
I like that. I don't think I've ever wanted to make it as challenging as starting a nonprofit. At least I want to like start my for-profit businesses first. But you make the comment on the call on the previous interview with Nathan that you're a full-blown capitalist. I don't remember exactly what you said, and I couldn't agree more. I think I have this desire to ensure that whatever I'm building is making progress, right? Is just moving whatever forward, right? And then it's me at my core, total capitalist, but like why not add that complexity of social impact, but more than that,
Yeah.
So I don't know. So in the last like 5 minutes, these social enterprises, right, or right at this point, these individuals are not necessarily building social enterprises. These are entrepreneurs that have that social impact angle to their way of thinking and don't really know what a social enterprise is. Like where do you recommend they start? Like how can they take small steps to creating larger impact?
Yeah. Well, I mean, generally with for kind of social entrepreneurs or those interested in starting, that's your question, right? So how do you have somebody that's interested in creating an organization that makes the world a better place? Where do they start?
Or already has a company, or they're just an individual that has this desire to progress society at large.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm a strategic planner, so I'm going to say we start with a strategic plan. But yeah, no, I'm serious. That's kind of where you would start is getting your stakeholders in a room together or virtually and really working on, what is your identity as an organization? Who are you? What do you do? Where do you want to be in the future? And really define that mission and your vision. And your mission should include something, and your vision should include something about, making the world a better place or fixing this particular social problem that a community is struggling with. And from there, you just begin to distill that vision into goals, long-term 3 to 5 year goals, and then determine what you're going to tackle in the immediate future. What objectives are you going to have over the next 12 months? And brainstorm some initiatives. What are some different projects that we're going to do? And an excellent kind of tool that I highly recommend to everyone is using a logic model. Is create a logic model. You can do this for your organization. You could do this for an individual. A person can do this. But at the top, just take a white sheet of paper, notebook paper, printer paper, right across the top, your resources from left to right, resources, activities, outputs, and outcomes. And then list everything that goes into what you do as an organization. That's going to be funding, your staff time, anything else, information that you get, the activities, the things that you actually do day to day, your programs, your projects, the outputs from those activities, number of people served, X number revenue, sales, and then what's the purpose of those outputs, those activities, what change they make in the world. So those are the outcomes, and begin to link those, draw lines from these resources lead into these activities to these outputs. And that's a good way to kind of visualize. People really struggle with this type of very abstract conversation if it's just, in a room talking to one another. A lot of people struggle with that. But once you see it on paper, you begin to and represent it almost. It's not a flow chart, but it looks like a flow chart. People begin to make links once they see it spatially. And so I highly recommend doing that, and you'll start seeing where all of these different pieces of the puzzle start fitting together. All of these different pieces of the puzzle of your organization, how they work together to get to this ultimate outcome or these ultimate outcomes. So that's where I would start. And of course, you want to figure out how you're going to measure your success along the way. How are you going to ensure that you reach those outcomes? And I can help you with all of that.
Yeah, is there a specific software that you use, or do you have a template maybe?
Yeah, so I work with various throughout the strategic planning process, or throughout the whole process, different templates. And we'll start with, and I'll tell you the kind of the steps, the 5 steps, and kind of an acronym for it is ASOPO, ASOPO. And we start out with an assessment, and that's just getting a general assessment of where your organization is, where do we need to focus, what's some input from your stakeholders, and then we go into the strategic planning, so defining your identity and your long-term goals. The second or the third, number 3 is operational planning, distilling those abstract goals into operational steps, objectives, and initiatives, and creating a budget. P is performance planning. So that's kind of looking at your different key performance indicators and what are we actually going to measure? How are we going to measure success? And how are we going to evaluate that? And at that point, we'll put together, I like to use a simple spreadsheet for that. There are software out there for that. And for more complicated, larger organizations, we could use something like that. But a spreadsheet can do a lot. And so you just construct kind of a way to monitor that over time. And then finally, so we did ASOPO. The final O is ongoing performance management. And that's something else where, with strategic planning, with this type of planning work, it's not something you just do and forget about for the next 3 years or whatever, or you just take the document and put it in a drawer. This has to be something that's connected with actual improvements day to day. So how are we actually going to meet back up and review our performance and take that information and improve? How are we going to report to our stakeholders, say annual reports? How are we going to put together documents that report what we've done over the last year and what we plan to do over the next 12 months? And so that's kind of one of the most important pieces, is that ongoing piece, because until you have that final piece of the puzzle, everything else is worthless unless it's actually changing the way you do work day to day. And so that wasn't exactly what you asked, but yeah, we use a variety of software and
No, I
throughout
love
the whole
it. I
thing.
appreciate it. So just to summarize quickly for the audience, you've got Stephen Brantley over here building bridges cross sectors and industries, performance planning, and making the world a better place.